in the batch node bin, you will notice now that there's a new, in the I/O section, that there's a new node which is called gateway import. Gateway import is something that we anticipate to be the replacement to the actual legacy import node that people use today, typically to deal with 3D stuff in a direct connection. So gateway import actually uses the capacity of the gateway to understand multi-channel EXR data and obviously other types of formats, and preserves that representation within batch. So it is typically something that you would want to use if you're dealing with render passes. The gateway import node will actually understand render passes and preserve them in a single entity within batch. So let's see how that works. In order to use the gateway import node, what I'm going to do is just drag a node, and here I'm brought into the network. I'm browsing through a specific directory here where I have a bunch of multi-channel EXR files. So as you know, if I double click on a multi-channel, I can see all the different passes that are nested inside of the multi-channel EXR. Double click again, it collapses it. So all of these are essentially multi-channel EXR passes. I can go ahead and select any of these multi-channel clips and load it into a gateway import node. And what you see is that it appears as a single entity here with a clip name that's right now written in pink. It tells you actually here how many frames it has detected in the image sequence. And if I hold Shift-C above the clip, it actually uncollapses the gateway import node, and what it will show you is its content with all the different passes that have that are actually nested inside of the OpenEXR file. So you are no longer limited to just an RGBA EXR. All the multi-channel structure of the EXR is actually preserved in the gateway import node, which is something the import node is incapable of doing right now. And and as we move forward, we plan on investing more inside of the gateway import as opposed to the import node, which you can expect to gradually fade away. So if I go to the F4, click F4, you will notice that if I then go Control up and down, I can actually cycle through the different layers that I have inside of my OpenEXR file. And they're all there, and I can use them again as a single entity inside of a batch setup. And there's a number of advantages also that come from using the gateway node. One, for example, here if I switch back, so I have this simple setup that I have here that's using a multi-channel gateway node. Here are all the different passes. They've been assembled in order to, again, produce this result here, where essentially some of the passes were color warped so that the result becomes blue. One thing that is really interesting is that if you look at the UI of the gateway clip, is that you will notice that there is a detection of the taxonomy of the different passes. So if Mentoray was your rendering engine, it typically writes automatically the type of render pass that it's creating, and this is automatically detected and actually reported as a type of render pass. And the interesting thing about this is that if you actually double click on the gateway node and decided to actually select another multi-channel OpenEXR, if there is a similar taxonomy that is detected, it will actually preserve the connection. So there's a heuristics mechanism that gets in place, and even though this particular file has more render passes than the previous one, it will maintain the connections of the ones that were in common. So the lighting passes, the reflection passes, all of these, as you see, the connections were preserved. I can go ahead and if I just look at my context, well, the result was automatically applied, so my color correction was applied and all the connections were preserved. Again, if I double click again and select another file, go ahead and load this, it gets automatically replaced. So you see this particular multi-channel does not have the same amount of render passes, but the ones that were in common, the connections were actually preserved. And if I go again and click on 2 to see my context, you see that it applies. So that's pretty cool. This is something that you can use, obviously, to your advantage when you're replacing things. And I also want to point out that underneath this mechanism, there's actually an XML format that describes the clip metadata, and this is completely customizable by users. So if you wanted to adjust the taxonomy for it to be different from mental race specific taxonomy, it's possible for you to do that. And the XML format that is underlying is actually documented. So it's free for users to actually customize to their own specific needs. But by default, everything is sort of tweaked to recognize automatically the mental ray render pass taxonomy. One thing also an important thing to note, and a side effect of actually using the gateway, is that you could even choose to import red files directly through the gateway import node. Most of the formats that are supported by the gateway will properly translate into a gateway import node. Actually, interestingly, if I even were to look at something like a bunch of PSD files, and again, this is kind of like a side effect. So I'm browsing to a directory where I have a bunch of PSDs. You will see that if I, for example, load this particular file, it will also be actually detected as a multi-channel file. Those are kind of like secondary effects. The main purpose of the gateway import node is to facilitate really the render pass workflows in conjunction with 3D renders and allowing again the transfer all the different lighting passes, shadow passes, reflection passes in a single entity. And again, for your convenience, you can just hit Shift-C on top of any of the clips, and it will actually compact them so that you don't have to necessarily deal with the entire complexity of the structure of the node. So this is something that is definitely something that you'd want to consider in conjunction with all the improvements to the FBX and the way that we import 3D geometry into the application. The other flip side of the coin is the gateway import that actually deals with being able to import actual render passes as opposed to geometry. And that's it for the gateway import. It's also worth noting that the 2012 release adds full vertical editorial capabilities to stereo footage. So the limitation that you had in 2011 that locked you to a single layer is essentially gone in 2012. So you can pretty much have as many layers as you want. And here you see I have a multi-layer stereoscopic timeline gap with a gap effects that's on top of it to do color correction. So the whole vertical editorial capabilities that you have on single light footage actually now extends to stereoscopic footage. And not only can you add stereoscopic gap effects, but obviously multi-layer transitions, soft effects as well. Containers and matte containers are both supported in a stereo workflow. So it puts essentially the timeline on stereoscopic footage on par with what you actually know today with single light footage. So it's definitely something to look out for on top of this the 3D stereoscopic camera tracking capabilities that we've added inside of Action.